Fox News contributor, former Secretary of State. Wonderful to see you today. So let's start here. The way that the president framed it, Carney's coming here upon request. He's saying, I want a meeting with the president. He gets it. What do you think it's about?
Harris, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on. Look, I think the newly elected prime minister does, in fact, want to come see President Trump and get a deal done. I think that's precisely why he's coming here. The rhetoric he used during his campaign, we just heard it, is stark. But I suspect when he's with President Trump today, he understands that there's got to be cooperation, that whether it's natural resources and lumber, oil and gas in the west of Canada, automotive folks, the hockey folks, all of them have a deep interest in having a economic relationship and a security relationship with the United States. So I'm optimistic that the meeting will outperform what seems like pretty low expectations, and that we'll get to a better place. President Trump will continue to put America first and deliver really good outcomes for American workers as a result of his meeting with the new prime minister today.
You know, I was reading some details about the U.S. trade deficit with Canada, and reportedly it exists largely because the United States imports a large quantity of cheap Canadian heavy crude oil, which helps gas prices to stay down for American drivers. I mean, is that something that would possibly change? Does that get sweetened when we do a deal?
Look, I think that's very important. You saw when President Trump initially put the tariffs in place on Canada, there were exemptions for some of the energy products that flowed from there. It's really important that we have affordable energy here in the United States. A good deal of that does come from Canada, processed here, sometimes processed in the north, sometimes. Just have to get it all right. We don't want to drive costs up. I know President Trump is focused on preventing inflation, and that for ordinary Americans, putting gasoline in the car is something that is unavoidable. You have to do it. You have to get your family around. You got to get to work. And I'm confident that they'll find a happy place there. It may take a little while. These deals are complicated, as you know, Harris. But I'm optimistic that between the U.S. and Canada, we can find common ground.
Well, real quickly, when you were with the former Trump administration, the first one, what was the relationship like with Canada?
You know, it was difficult because Prime Minister Trudeau was incredibly difficult. He was very woke, very left. Carney comes from a financial background. The new prime minister comes from a place that's much closer to President Trump in terms of background. He's a finance business guy. Trudeau was anything but that. So it was pretty testy. On the security side, we actually had great cooperation, both as an intelligence and diplomatic matter. They were good partners, Five Eyes partners for us that delivered good outcomes.
All right. New deadline for Hamas to make a deal. And if the terrorists don't meet it, the Jewish state says it will flatten Gaza. Israel demands that the savage beasts who carried out a massacre on their citizens must immediately return the hostages and agree to a ceasefire. May 15th is the last day to seal that deal. And that timing coincides with President Trump's upcoming visit to the region. Fox News chief political analyst Brit Hume has this to say about the ceasefire deal.
That remains up in the air as well, with the possibility now existing that the Israelis are going to do what they stopped doing in 2005 when they got out of Gaza. They occupied the place, as you recall, Brett, for a long time, and the Israelis pulled out in 2005. That didn't stop Hamas from complaining bitterly about the continued occupation, which was no more. But here we are after all this, and it looks like Israel could be back in Gaza and taking charge of the place. Wow.
So the U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said this a short time ago.
The United States has said repeatedly, and what Marco Rubio has said, is that Hamas cannot exist, that the only way forward for Gaza, all the hostages have got to be released. The United States has been clear on that and forceful, and that has not changed.
578 days in the custody of savages. Right now, 59 hostages still in captivity. We think 24 of them may still be alive. We pray they are. 35 are confirmed dead, and their bodies are still in Gaza. It has been 73 days since Hamas returned a single living hostage.
Gaza, get some food. People are starving, and we're going to help them get some food. Hamas is making it impossible because they're taking everything that's brought in. But we're going to help the people of Gaza because they're being treated very badly by Hamas.
So that's an interesting point to get with you now. This aid that's being offered by the current president, what does that do to the mix of our relationship with Israel, or nothing at all?
Harris, that's really very important. First point is, I think the Israelis have an obligation to go get those hostages at this point. You talk about more than 500 days. They have worked, they've diplomatically presented options, and Hamas has steadfastly refused it now that they're down to the last hostages. And so I can completely see why they're activating reservists and getting ready to go. At the same time, I think the Israelis and all of us want the innocent people in Gaza to be fed. And so that has to be done through a mechanism that doesn't touch the terrorists, that the food doesn't flow through Hamas or through the UN organization, it used to be called UNRWA, that delivered that, but Hamas was infiltrated. They've got to get this right. We've got to get them food and assistance, as President Trump said. But the Israelis have to do the necessary and protect themselves. They no more want to go back into Gaza than a man in the moon. They enjoyed being out of it. But now they've clearly seen that's not possible with Hamas still existing. And so they've got to go eliminate the last Hamas warrior, all the weapons, and then deliver security for the Israeli people and ultimately a better life for the people living in Gaza as well.
Look, it's complicated, I know, and it's about messaging. However, look, it says it up on the screen right now. When you tell people that you're going to flatten Gaza if the hostages are not freed and a cease deal isn't coming forth, isn't reached, that is a far cry away from trying to help those people. And I'm wondering, for a single reason I asked this question, how does that obligate the United States? I mean, they're our ally. If they go in and flatten another territory, what does that do to our relationship?
Look, I think that rhetoric's pretty heated. I probably would have advised against using the rhetoric about flattening buildings. That's not their objective. The Israeli objective is to eliminate these savages and these terrorists. And sometimes that'll require taking down structures in which they're hiding. And sometimes they'll hide civilians there, Harris. We've seen that. But I think the Israelis have every objective to do this both lawfully and properly and decently. But they're going to make sure they get security right. And then and only then can the world, including the United States, do the necessary to get humanitarian assistance into the folks who need it.
So glad you're with me. Mike Pompeo, thank you very much for joining me in Focus.
Thank you, Harris.